The moment I stepped into that conference room in Atlanta for my parents' will reading, I heard my older sister cross her arms and say it coldly loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't need to be here. You won't receive anything." Her husband leaned back in his chair with a smirk and added, "Did you come just to watch us win?" Their words hung in the air while I stood there in my simple jeans and boots, feeling every pair of eyes turned toward me like I was some uninvited guest who had wandered into the wrong place. They looked at me as if I was an outsider, someone who had no business being part of this moment, and in their minds, I probably was. My name is Taylor Brooks. I grew up in a small town in Georgia, where life revolved around hard work and quiet ambitions, but I left all that behind years ago to build something of my own from nothing. Nobody in that room knew the full story of what I had created since then, and they clearly assumed I was still the same person who walked away, with just one suitcase and big dreams. They underestimated me completely, just like they always had. What they didn't realize was that by the end of this meeting, the entire will was going to become invalid because of what I was about to reveal. Their confidence was built on lies they thought no one would ever uncover, but I had the proof, and I was ready to use it. Before we get into what happened next, if you're enjoying this story already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest. Drop a like and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and it means a lot to me. Thank you for being here. Growing up in that small Georgia town shaped everything about my early life. My parents poured every ounce of energy into creating a local real estate business that started with nothing more than a few scattered lots and clients who often changed their minds midway through a deal. They spent countless hours driving back roads to evaluate properties, negotiating prices over coffee in diners, and following up with buyers who needed extra reassurance before committing to a purchase. My father took charge of expanding beyond our county, which meant he frequently traveled for days or weeks to attend auctions in neighboring states or meet developers interested in larger parcels. Those absences became routine as he chased leads that could bring in commissions big enough to cover mounting expenses back home. He returned with stories of promising sites and new contacts, always optimistic that the next trip would finally push the company past survival mode into real growth. My mother managed the day-to-day operations from a modest office downtown, handling listings, scheduling viewings, and dealing with paperwork that piled up whenever a sale closed. She developed a reputation for honesty that kept referrals coming in steadily, even when market slowdowns made transactions rare. Family time adjusted to fit around their commitments, with dinners pushed later after evening calls or weekend showings that ran longer than expected. Conversations at the table often turned to current listings or client quirks, blending home life seamlessly with business concerns that never fully switched off. My older sister Haley thrived in that environment from a young age, accompanying my mother to open houses and learning how to stage rooms or greet potential buyers with confidence that impressed adults twice her age. She picked up details about mortgages and closing costs, quickly earning praise that reinforced her role as the one who seemed naturally suited to carry on the family legacy. Haley often joined my father on shorter trips during school breaks, absorbing his strategies for spotting undervalued land and building relationships with local officials. Those experiences gave her a sense of purpose early on, as she talked excitedly about one day taking over expansions or managing bigger projects that my parents only dreamed about at the time. My mother encouraged that enthusiasm, sharing tips on client management, while they worked side by side on marketing flyers or updating property photos. Haley absorbed it all eagerly, volunteering for tasks that let her contribute directly and receive recognition for her efforts around the office. The business demanded sacrifices from everyone, including skipped vacations or postponed repairs at home, to free up cash for advertising campaigns during slow seasons. My parents weighed every decision carefully, discussing late into the night whether to take on riskier listings that promised higher returns but carried uncertainty. Their partnership relied on complementary strengths, with my father focusing on outreach, and my mother ensuring nothing fell through the cracks operationally. Haley benefited from that dynamic, gaining practical skills that set her apart while the rest of us navigated the constant pull of work demands in quieter ways. Risks accumulated over the years through loans for equipment upgrades or additional staff during busy periods, requiring vigilant repayment schedules that added pressure to close deals consistently. They celebrated milestones modestly, like treating the family to dinner after a particularly profitable quarter, but those moments remained rare amid ongoing hustle. My father's trips grew longer as he targeted markets farther away, convinced that regional connections would eventually secure the company's future against local fluctuations. My mother adapted by taking on more responsibilities, training temporary help when needed, and maintaining client relationships that sustained revenue streams. Everything changed abruptly during one specific journey, when my parents decided to attend a regional conference together. Hoping to combine learning new industry trends with a brief getaway, they rarely allowed themselves. They left with optimism about ideas that could revitalize stagnant growth, discussing potential partnerships on the drive. The severe highway accident happened without warning due to poor weather conditions, taking both lives instantly and leaving behind a void filled with unfinished plans and sudden silence where their drive once dominated daily existence. The loss hit with overwhelming force, stripping away the central figures who had held the family and business together through persistent effort and shared vision for so long. A few days after the funeral, I overheard a conversation between Haley and her husband Derek while I was sorting through some remaining documents in the house. They thought they were alone, so Haley had the phone on speaker, making every word crystal clear as it echoed slightly in the empty room still heavy with recent loss. Haley spoke first, explaining that they needed to accelerate the inheritance proceedings to get funds released without further delay. She pointed out specific obligations coming due soon that required immediate cash to avoid escalating consequences. Haley insisted the properties and accounts my parents left behind were now rightfully theirs, so prolonging the legal steps served no purpose beyond unnecessary bureaucracy. Derek responded with firm agreement, mentioning upcoming expenses they had already committed to based on expectations from the will. He added that waiting longer would only complicate their plans for consolidating everything quickly. Their tone carried an urgency completely out of place so soon after the tragedy, focusing entirely on timelines and amounts, rather than any lingering grief. Haley continued by suggesting ways to pressure the lawyer for faster processing, even if it meant scheduling extra meetings or providing additional documentation up front. Derek supported the idea, noting how certain investments they wanted to make depended on accessing the capital within weeks rather than months. The conversation shifted to practical details about transferring titles or liquidating assets that could generate quick liquidity. Haley expressed frustration at potential holdups from probate rules, while Derek reassured her that their position as primary beneficiaries gave them leverage to push things forward. Listening to them prioritize financial logistics over everything else stirred an unease I could not shake. Their words painted a picture of anticipation that felt detached from the mourning period everyone else was still navigating. Haley wrapped up by confirming next steps for contacting the estate office first thing Monday morning. Derek ended the call with a reminder to keep things discreet until paperwork finalized. As the line went silent, I stood there processing how their discussion centered solely on gaining control of what my parents had built through years of effort. The haste in their voices contrasted sharply with the subdued atmosphere that had enveloped the family since the accident. Something about the way they framed the inheritance as an immediate solution to personal needs raised questions I had not considered before. Their focus on speed and certainty suggested motivations beyond simple bereavement administration. I replayed fragments of the exchange in my mind, noting how little emotion surfaced amid talk of deadlines and disbursements. The discrepancy between their approach and the raw loss still affecting me highlighted a disconnect that demanded closer attention. Haley and Derek appeared to view the situation primarily through a lens of opportunity rather than closure. That realization settled uncomfortably, prompting me to wonder what other conversations I might have missed in the preceding days. Their planning revealed priorities that felt misaligned with the family's collective sorrow. I stepped away quietly, determined to observe more carefully as events unfolded toward the formal reading. 2 days later, my close friend Riley Dunn called, just to see how I was coping with everything that had happened. She kept her voice gentle as she asked about the funeral arrangements and whether I needed help with anything practical around the house. Riley then mentioned she had run into someone from the old neighborhood bank, who let slip that Haley seemed to be dealing with some heavy money troubles lately. According to the rumor, Haley had been calling around asking for extensions on loans or trying to restructure payments that were falling behind schedule. Riley did not push for details because she knew the timing was sensitive, but hearing that made me pause and think about recent behavior I had noticed without connecting the dots. The call ended with Riley offering to come over anytime if I wanted company, which felt comforting in the moment. That conversation lingered in my mind enough to make me decide on taking a closer look at things myself, instead of dismissing it as small-town talk. I sat down at my computer and pulled up the county website where public property records are available for anyone to search. Typing in the addresses my parents owned brought up recent activity that caught my attention right away. Several forms showed Haley's signature on updates filed just days before the accident, and a few more shortly afterward. Those documents changed how certain parcels were titled, moving them into a trust she controlled without mentioning anything to me at the time. One entry in particular involved a piece of land my parents bought years ago along a growing corridor everyone knew had potential for future sales. Haley had filed paperwork to separate it from the main holdings, listing it under a different category that lowered its visible value in estate calculations. Searching further through attached notes revealed emails exchanged with a local surveyor Haley hired to redraw boundaries in a way that made part of the property appear less buildable. The surveyor provided reports supporting reduced appraisals, which Haley then used to update official descriptions on file. Additional correspondence turned up messages to a real estate attorney asking for advice on transferring deeds quietly so they would not raise flags during probate review. Haley requested language that directed proceeds from any sale straight to her accounts rather than the shared estate pool. Each new document connected to the previous ones, showing steps taken over several weeks to reshape how assets would be viewed when the will went through formal reading. The pattern became impossible to ignore as I printed out copies for my own records. Haley clearly worked to hide or diminish valuable portions while positioning herself to claim the rest without challenge. Discovering those actions hit hard because they happened while the rest of us were still reeling from losing my parents so suddenly. The effort put into altering records suggested planning that went beyond normal estate preparation. Haley used moments of distraction to make changes no one would question until it was too late. Seeing the timestamps lined up with dates I remembered from hospital visits or funeral planning made the betrayal feel even more personal. All the evidence pointed to a deliberate attempt to control the inheritance outcome from the very beginning. 3 days before the official meeting, Haley pulled me aside in the parking lot outside the lawyer's office after a preliminary visit. She wasted no time getting to the point, telling me straight out that I should not get my hopes up about receiving anything meaningful from the estate. Haley spoke with a tone that mixed pity and certainty, as if she was doing me a favor by preparing me for disappointment early. She explained that my parents had always intended the bulk of their hard-earned assets to stay with the one who stuck around and helped build the business over the years. Derek stood right beside her, nodding along while adding his own comments about how I had chosen to leave town long ago and build a life far away from family responsibilities. He brought up old examples of times I missed holidays or big events because of my own choices, making it sound like those decisions automatically disqualified me from any real share now. Derek's words carried a mocking edge as he reminded me that showing up late to the process did not change the facts my parents had already set in place. The conversation felt calculated, with both of them taking turns reinforcing the idea that my absence over the years meant I forfeited any claim to what they viewed as their rightful inheritance. Haley went on to say that coming to the reading would only make things awkward for everyone if I expected something different from reality. She suggested it might be better if I kept my distance to avoid unnecessary tension during an already difficult time for the family. Derek chimed in again, pointing out how my independent path had worked out well for me anyway, so relying on estate proceeds hardly seemed necessary in my situation. Their combined message came across clearly as a warning to lower expectations and accept a minor role at best. I listened without interrupting much, at first taking in how confidently they presented their version of events. When the moment felt right, I asked Haley directly about the recent documents I had seen with her signature on property updates involving my parents' holdings. The question caught her off guard for a split second before she brushed it off as routine administrative tasks anyone could have handled during the chaos following the accident. Derek quickly jumped in to support her, claiming those signatures were only to keep things organized while waiting for official probate to start. Both of them shifted uncomfortably and changed the subject almost immediately, asking instead about my travel plans back home after the meeting wrapped up. Their evasion became obvious in the way they avoided eye contact and rushed to end the discussion with vague reassurances about everything being fair in the end. Haley even smiled tightly while saying we could talk more later if needed, though her body language suggested the opposite. Derek wrapped things up by checking his watch and mentioning another appointment they could not miss. Watching them walk away together left me with a stronger resolve than before. I stayed calm on the surface throughout the exchange, responding only with short acknowledgments to keep the conversation flowing naturally. Inside, their dismissive attitude and quick deflection confirmed the suspicions that had been building from everything I uncovered earlier. The way they teamed up to downplay my involvement while protecting their position made the upcoming reading feel even more critical. I drove away from that parking lot knowing without doubt that bringing the evidence forward publicly was the only way to address what they were trying to control behind the scenes. Their attempt to manage my expectations just strengthened my determination to let the facts speak for themselves when the time came. The evening before the will reading, I met my general manager Mason at his downtown office to review all the evidence I had collected up to that point. We laid out the printed pages and digital files on a conference table, starting with the most basic records to build a solid foundation for what would come next. Mason examined the signatures closely, comparing them against known samples from my parents' past business contracts to highlight inconsistencies in the loop formations and ink pressure. He noted how certain dates on the documents aligned suspiciously with times when Haley had sole access to the family safe or computer systems. Mason then verified the legal standing of each piece, pointing out that official stamps from county clerks added undeniable credibility for any formal presentation. He recommended compiling affidavits from witnesses who could confirm the timeline of events leading up to the changes. I organized the materials into sequential folders, labeling each with key dates to make navigation straightforward during the meeting. Mason assisted by cross-referencing public database entries with private emails I obtained through proper channels, ensuring no gaps existed in the chain of proof. His expertise from handling similar corporate disputes helped identify potential counter-arguments Haley might raise. We discussed strategies for presenting without overwhelming the lawyer, focusing on clarity over volume. Mason suggested practicing a brief summary to keep the explanation concise, yet comprehensive. Recalling my father's advice about maintaining fairness in all dealings resurfaced vividly as we sorted through the stack. He always emphasized that true security came from integrity rather than shortcuts, especially within close relationships. Those principles guided my parents through tough times in their business, and seeing them disregarded now fueled a deeper commitment to set things right. Mason shared a brief anecdote from his own career about a case where timely evidence turned the tide, offering reassurance without overstepping into personal territory. His calm demeanor provided steady support as emotions welled up from reviewing the manipulations in detail. We wrapped up by securing backups on encrypted drives in case originals needed protection during transit. The complete set now formed a compelling narrative that left little room for denial. Mason concluded our session with confirmation that the package met standards for admissibility in estate proceedings. Walking out into the night air brought a sense of readiness I had not felt earlier in the week. Protecting my parents' true wishes stood as the priority above any lingering family ties strained by recent discoveries. Mason's involvement solidified that path forward, without doubt. The morning of the official will reading, the conference room in Atlanta filled with attention that made every chair scrape, and every cough seem louder than usual. Everyone had arrived early, settling into seats around the long table while waiting for the process to begin. Raymond Holt, the estate lawyer handling my parents' affairs, opened his folder and started reading the main distribution section in a steady voice. He detailed how the majority of properties, accounts, and business interests would pass to Haley and Derek as primary beneficiaries. Haley sat straight with a small smile playing on her lips, while Derek leaned back, looking relaxed, as if the outcome was already settled in their favor. The words described allocations that matched exactly what they had been expecting based on their recent confidence. Raymond continued through clauses about personal items and smaller bequests, maintaining a neutral tone that kept the room quiet except for occasional page turns. When he paused to adjust his glasses, I stood up calmly and asked if we could pause the reading briefly for information that directly affected the document's validity. Raymond nodded agreement after a moment of consideration, inviting me to proceed with whatever I needed to share. I placed the organized folders on the table and began presenting the evidence one piece at a time, starting with copies of signatures that did not match my parents' known handwriting patterns. I explained how experts had confirmed discrepancies in pressure and formation across multiple forms Haley submitted. Next came records showing property descriptions altered to reduce reported values, complete with before and after comparisons from county filings. I pointed out emails and messages where Haley coordinated with outsiders to support those lower appraisals for estate purposes. The room grew quieter as each document appeared on the projector screen Mason had set up earlier at my request. Haley shifted in her seat, her earlier smile fading into a tight line while she avoided looking directly at the displays. Derek gripped the armrest harder, his relaxed posture giving way to rigid attention. I continued with timestamps proving changes occurred during periods when Haley had exclusive access to relevant accounts and files. The pattern emerged clearly through connected transactions designed to redirect significant assets away from fair division. Raymond listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification on specific dates or sources to ensure accuracy. When I finished laying out the full sequence, he reviewed the special clause my parents included as protection against exactly this kind of interference. He read it aloud: any beneficiary found to have intentionally manipulated or concealed estate elements would forfeit all rights, with assets reverting to alternate provisions they established. The clause activated immediately upon verified evidence, which the materials provided without question. Raymond declared Haley and Derek disqualified from inheritance, directing everything to the contingency plan my parents set for situations involving proven bad faith. Haley's face drained of color as the words sank in her hands, trembling slightly on the table while she stared at the lawyer in disbelief. She managed to whisper, "This can't be happening," before her voice cracked completely. Derek turned red, slamming his palm down once and muttering, "You're destroying everything we counted on." His eyes darted between me and the documents as if searching for some mistake that would undo the moment. Haley finally spoke louder, saying, "How could you do this to your own sister after all these years?" The question came out shaky, mixed with anger and desperation that filled the silent room. Derek added bitterly, "You waited until now to pull this stunt." Their reactions shifted from shock to raw frustration as the finality settled. Raymond confirmed the alternate distribution would proceed without delay, honoring my parents' clear instructions. The meeting concluded shortly after leaving Haley and Derek to gather their things in stunned quiet, while the rest of us processed the abrupt turn. Their plans collapsed in front of everyone, replaced by consequences my parents foresaw and guarded against long ago. 4 months after that day, Haley filed a lawsuit against me, challenging the will's validity and claiming the evidence was fabricated to exclude her unfairly. The case moved quickly through hearings because the documents stood up to every scrutiny from her legal team. Judges reviewed the signatures, timestamps, and correspondence in detail, finding no grounds to overturn the clause my parents included. The court dismissed the challenge entirely, ruling that the manipulation attempts were proven beyond doubt. Haley ended up responsible for all her attorney fees, which added up significantly over the months of preparation and appearances. Derek walked away shortly after the ruling, unable to handle the mounting debts they now faced without the expected inheritance to cover them. Their arguments escalated as financial reality set in, leading to a quiet separation that no one in our old circles talked about openly. Haley struggled with the permanent loss of any claim to what my parents built, facing consequences that extended beyond just money into damaged relationships and reputation. I made the choice to cut off all contact with Haley, completely blocking numbers and avoiding any channels where messages might come through. No more attempts at reconciliation felt possible after the depth of deception revealed in court. The alternate provisions my parents set activated smoothly, transferring assets into directions they specified for situations exactly like this one. Those resources allowed me to expand my company in ways that created more opportunities for employees and partners who shared honest values. I directed portions toward community projects focused on supporting small business startups in areas similar to the Georgia town where everything began. Helping others navigate early challenges mirrored the path my parents took, turning their contingency plan into something positive and lasting. Life settled into a rhythm centered on work that mattered and connections built on trust rather than obligation. Surrounding myself with people who appreciated effort and integrity brought a peace I had not known during years of distant family dynamics. The entire experience reinforced boundaries that protected hard-earned progress from those who prioritized personal gain over fairness. Looking back on this story, the biggest lesson is that family ties do not excuse betrayal or manipulation when it comes to honoring someone's final wishes. Greed can blind people to the long-term damage it causes, not just to relationships, but to their own future stability. Standing up for what is right, even against close relatives, protects the legacy of those who worked honestly their whole lives. It also shows that true success comes from building on integrity, not shortcuts that crumble under scrutiny. In the end, cutting toxic connections frees you to focus on growth and supporting others who value the same principles. Thank you so much for sticking with this story all the way to the end. Your time and attention mean everything to me as I share these experiences. If anything resonated with you or brought up thoughts of your own, please drop a comment below and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your perspectives on family inheritance or standing up for what's right.